We finally done. I'm not. I keep the window at the door, baby. See, Brandon.
How you like me now? How you like me now? How you like me now? Did you like that? Did you like that? Did you like the Clark show, baby? Did you like the Clark show that she put on in Chicago? Any and everybody can get it. Was that white privilege? Well, wait a minute, Dijonai Carrington. Was that white privilege? 37 points. Was that white privilege? 10 assists, 37.10 assists, double-double. Was that a white privilege double-double? Was that 8 3-pointers? Right in your eyes.
Gotta highlight that, but she wants everyone to know it's not why she plays. She's trying to, deep from like Michigan. It's a mentality. That'll be the first.
Welcome back to WNBACORE, WNBA fans. Caitlin Clark just delivered a performance that has everyone talking with 37 points and a full-on takeover. The spotlight is once again on Clark and Dijonai Carrington. But what really happened during the game? And did Carrington actually storm out after Clark's explosive performance? Let's jump straight into today's video and break it all down. 37 points. Just let that number sink in, because when Caitlin Clark puts up a performance like that, the conversation around the WNBA changes instantly. And this time it wasn't just about the points. It was about the pressure. It was about the matchup. It was about Dijonai Carrington. And it was about a completely different controversy involving Enes Kanter that suddenly pulled even more attention toward the game. What happened next had fans talking everywhere. Some called it a statement performance. Others saw it as another chapter in the growing Caitlin Clark versus the world conversation. But here's the part that makes this story so interesting. Was this really Caitlin Clark humbling Carrington, or was something much bigger happening on the court? Because once you look beyond the headline, the story gets a lot more complicated. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why this particular performance created so much discussion.
Dijonai Carrington, you put 823 on X like that was going to be some big day for you. It was a day for you to get embarrassed by the GOAT Caitlin Clark again. Caitlin and Kelsey combined for 67 points.
Caitlin Clark doesn't really get normal basketball games anymore. Every game comes with expectations. Every shot gets analyzed. Every missed shot gets clipped. Every confrontation becomes a debate, and every big performance becomes a headline. That's the reality of being one of the most talked about players in women's basketball. So, imagine walking into a game knowing that millions of people aren't simply watching the score. They're watching you. They're watching how you respond to pressure. They're watching your body language. They're watching your matchup. And they're waiting for that one moment that changes the entire conversation. That's exactly why a 37-point performance carries so much weight. Because scoring 37 points isn't simply about putting numbers on a scoreboard. It's about taking control of the narrative. And that's where Dijonai Carrington enters the story. Whenever Caitlin Clark and Dijonai Carrington are involved in the same conversation, fans immediately pay attention. Why? Because their previous interactions have already generated enormous discussion among basketball fans. Carrington is known for her physical, competitive, defensive style. Clark, meanwhile, has spent much of her professional career dealing with intense defensive attention. That's nothing unusual in basketball. Great offensive players are going to be targeted. They're going to be pressured. They're going to be forced into uncomfortable situations, and Clark has certainly experienced that. But here's what makes her response fascinating. Instead of allowing the physicality or the attention to completely change her game, she keeps looking for ways to create offense. Sometimes that's through three-point shooting, sometimes it's through transition, sometimes it's passing, and sometimes when the defense gives her the opportunity, she simply attacks. And on this particular night, the scoring exploded. 37 points. That's the kind of number that immediately changes the tone of a game. Suddenly, every possession feels important, every defensive adjustment matters, and every mistake gets magnified. Let's put 37 points into perspective. When a player reaches that kind of scoring total, you can't simply say, okay, she had a good game. No, that's a major offensive performance, because getting to 37 requires consistency. You can't rely on one hot quarter. You need multiple scoring opportunities. You need to convert. You need to stay aggressive. And most importantly, you need to keep producing when the defense knows you're the player they have to stop. That's the part that makes performances like this so impressive. Once a player gets hot, the defense usually adjusts. They bring extra attention. They change assignments. They try to force the player away from comfortable spots. But the elite scorers find another answer. And that's where Clark's offensive skill becomes so dangerous. Because even if the defense takes away one option, there's another. Take away the three, she can attack. Pressure the ball, she can create separation. Collapse on her, she can find a teammate. Give her space, she can make you pay. That's why Clark's offensive game creates so many problems. It's not just one weapon. It's the combination. Now, let me address the headline, Caitlin Clark brutally humbles Dijonai Carrington. That sounds incredible. It sounds like something huge happened, but basketball isn't quite that simple. A player scoring 37 doesn't automatically mean another player was humiliated. Carrington is a professional basketball player. She's competing at the highest level, and defensive matchups are part of the sport. So instead of framing it as one player destroying another, the more interesting question is what happens when an elite scorer finds a rhythm against aggressive defense. That's what viewers should pay attention to because that's where the basketball actually gets interesting. Clark wasn't necessarily trying to prove something to Carrington personally. She was trying to win, and that's an important distinction. The internet loves rivalries. It loves versus narratives. It loves turning competitive moments into personal battles. But sometimes the real story is simply this: one player had an outstanding offensive night, and the opposing defense had to deal with it. As the game progressed, Clark's confidence became increasingly obvious, and confidence is one of the most dangerous things in basketball. You can see it in the way a player moves, the way they call for the ball, the way they take a shot without hesitation, the way they immediately transition back into defense after scoring. Once a shooter gets into that zone, defenders have a problem because hesitation disappears. And that's when even difficult shots can start looking routine. For Clark, the three-point line has always been a major part of her identity as a scorer. But what makes her dangerous is that she doesn't have to stay behind that line. If defenders close out too aggressively, she can attack. If they stay back, she can shoot. If help defense arrives, she can pass. That creates a constant decision for the defense. And every decision creates another opportunity. That's basketball at its highest level. And just when you thought the Caitlin Clark discussion couldn't get any louder, Enes Kanter entered the conversation. Now, this is where we need to slow down because social media headlines can make separate events appear as though they're directly connected, but they aren't necessarily the same thing. Kanter has been a highly outspoken personality for years, especially when it comes to basketball and his opinions about the sport. His comments can generate enormous reactions. And whenever a major WNBA story is already trending, outside commentary can quickly become part of the larger conversation. That's exactly why viewers started asking questions. What was said? Why did it happen? Was there actually a connection to the game? And what exactly does "removed" mean in the context of the headline? Those are important questions because viral headlines often compress an entire story into 5 or 6 dramatic words. The reality can be much more nuanced. Think about the ingredients. You have Caitlin Clark, you have a huge scoring performance, you have Dijonai Carrington, a player already associated with intense competition against Clark, you have an outspoken former NBA player entering the discussion, and you have fans from completely different sides interpreting the same moment in completely different ways. That's basically the perfect recipe for viral sports content. One side says Clark proved everyone wrong. Another side says it was just one game. Someone else focuses on Carrington's defense. Another person focuses on Clark's shooting. And suddenly, a basketball game becomes a massive online argument. But here's something important, that's actually a sign of how much attention women's basketball is receiving. Players who previously might not have generated this level of conversation are now becoming central figures in major sports debates. And Clark is obviously at the center of much of that attention. Here's what I think gets lost in all the drama. The biggest story isn't whether Clark humbled one opponent. The bigger story is that expectations around her have become enormous. A normal player can have a good game. Clark has a good game and people immediately ask, is this the beginning of something bigger? She has a bad game and people ask, what's wrong? She has a great shooting night and suddenly she's the subject of national debate. That's an extraordinary level of attention. And maintaining performance under that kind of spotlight isn't easy because eventually the noise becomes part of the environment. The boos, the cheers, the social media debates, the criticism, the praise, the comparisons, all of it. The truly impressive athletes learn how to separate the noise from the game. And that may be one of the most important developments in Clark's professional career. And this is where we need to be fair. It's easy to make the story completely about Clark, but Carrington's role shouldn't be ignored. Defenders like Carrington have an extremely difficult job. They're asked to guard elite offensive players while dealing with constant scrutiny. One possession can make them look brilliant. The next possession, the offensive player scores. That's basketball. Even the best defenders in the world get beaten. The question is, what happens afterward? Do they adjust? Do they stay aggressive? Do they change their approach? Do they force the scorer into tougher situations? That's the chess match. And that's much more interesting than simply saying one player destroyed another. Because the real battle isn't always one possession. It's the adjustments over an entire game. Now, let's come back to that number, 37. Numbers don't have emotions, but fans do, and certain numbers become symbols. 37 points tells you something simple: Clark found a way to consistently generate offense. That's what matters. Whether she was shooting from outside, attacking opportunities, creating plays, or getting herself into scoring positions, the defense couldn't completely shut her down. And once that happens, the psychological pressure changes. Defenders start thinking, do we switch? Do we double? Do we chase her off the line? Do we let someone else beat us? Every defensive choice has a consequence. That's why elite scorers are so difficult to contain. You're not simply guarding the player. You're trying to solve a problem. And Clark presented a very difficult problem. Of course, once the game ended, the internet did what the internet always does. Clips started circulating. Fans started debating. Some celebrated Clark. Others defended Carrington. Some focused on the statistics. Others focused on individual plays. And then came the bigger arguments. Was Clark finally proving her critics wrong? Was Carrington getting too much criticism? Was the matchup becoming bigger than basketball? And what exactly was happening with the NS Cantor controversy? These are the questions that turn a normal game recap into a massive online discussion. But there's an important lesson here: don't let the headline replace the actual story. Watch the basketball. Look at the possessions. Look at the adjustments. Look at what both players actually did. That's where you find the truth. If there's one thing I would take away from a performance like this, it's not the rivalry, it's the mentality. Because elite players don't survive long by focusing entirely on their critics. They survive by focusing on the next possession. Miss a shot, next possession. Get pressured, next possession. Turn the ball over, next possession. Someone talks, next possession. That's the mentality required at the professional level. And that's why big performances can be so revealing. They show you how a player responds when everything around them is loud. So, who was the real winner here? Was it Caitlin Clark? Was it Carrington? Was it the team? Or was it simply the sport itself? Honestly, the biggest winner may have been women's basketball because people were talking, people were watching, people were debating, and people who might not normally follow every WNBA game were suddenly interested. That's powerful because sports grow when people care. And right now, people clearly care. They care about Clark. They care about her opponents. They care about the league, and they care about the conversation surrounding it. That's why every major performance gets amplified. And now comes the most interesting question: what happens after a 37-point explosion? Because one great game isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of another test. Now defenses know what Clark is capable of. Now opponents can study the film. They can identify the spots where she was comfortable. They can look for ways to force her into difficult decisions, and Clark will have to respond. That's what separates a great performance from sustained greatness. Can you do it again? Can you adjust when defenses adjust? Can you remain efficient when opponents specifically design their game plan around you? That's the challenge, and that's what makes the next chapter so fascinating. So, was Caitlin Clark's 37-point performance a brutal humbling of Dijonai Carrington? That's up for the fans to debate. But one thing isn't really debatable: 37 points is a statement. And whether you love Clark's game, criticize it, or simply enjoy watching the competition, performances like this are impossible to ignore. The Carrington storyline added another layer. The Enes Kanter controversy added even more attention, and social media turned the entire thing into a much bigger conversation. But underneath all the headlines, all the arguments, and all the viral clips, there was still basketball. A player found her rhythm. A defense tried to respond. And millions of people watched to see what would happen next. And that's exactly why this story isn't over. Because if Caitlin Clark can continue producing performances at this level, the next game won't just be another game. It'll be another test, another matchup, another opportunity, and another chance for the entire basketball world to start talking again. What do you think? Was this simply an incredible scoring performance, or did Caitlin Clark send a real message to the entire league? Let me know your take in the comments. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you subscribe, because the next chapter of this story could be even bigger.